Welcome to Just One Line, the podcast in which I briefly consider a work of literature through the lens of a single line, a single sentence, even a single word. I'm Bill Preston, writer and former teacher. Today I'm exploring a poem that I'm sure is familiar to many American readers who pass through our educational system, maybe every reader who passed through our educational system. I'm among the teachers who taught it for decades. Robert Frost's Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. I used to tell students Frost is tricky. I didn't mean by that, however, that his poetry is a trick or a stunt, or that his poems are a puzzle to solve. That's somewhat true in that if you aren't attentive to what he's telling you in the particulars of language and the imagistic details and the poetic devices, you'll miss the actual story and the ideas within the story. But it's not like he's trying to stump you, I think. He does want you to look twice or thrice, to slow down, to go back to the beginning, which is easy enough to do when it comes to a short poem like this. Let's begin with the first line of iambic tetrameter, four two-syllable units made up of an unstressed syllable and a stressed syllable. Whose woods these are, I think I know. Most crucial in that line is the clause, I think, or even the odd double clause, I think I know. That's what I want you to keep in mind. First, notice the awkward phrasing. Well, that's poetry, you might say. Poetry of certain eras has that elevated and artificial sound. It can, but it doesn't have to, certainly not by the time Frost is writing a century ago. Notice that while the first two lines sound elevated, whose woods these are, I think I know, his house is in the village, though, the next two don't. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. What makes the initial phrasing on the first two lines, especially the first line, sound odd? It's the word order. Now, word order in poetry can be altered from what sounds natural to achieve some effect or because you're trying to get the rhythm of the piece exactly right. But consider if you said the opening line more naturally, more directly, not concerning yourself with having to rhyme with your second line. You might readily say, I think I know whose woods these are. That's saying exactly the same thing, and in fact, in the exact same rhythm. The problem, and right away we get the issue of Frost being tricky, forcing us to read carefully, is that saying, I think I know whose woods these are, puts I think up front. Instead, whose woods lands in our ears and occurs to us visually first, burying the second half of the line, following which we move immediately to his house, mirroring the idea that the woods and some associated house are owned by the same person. I think, and now I've said it, that the seriousness of this switch most fully struck me when I taught students whose first language was Chinese. Now, as with all of my students, especially with poetry, I had them simply start the discussion by saying what literally happens, what the lines literally mean, which, given the simplicity of the language in this poem, seems easy enough. But to Chinese nationals, the phrase, I think I know, meant the same as, I know. I had to teach them the classic retort, do you think you know or do you know you know? I think I know is a way to express uncertainty without actually sounding uncertain. Everything else in the poem follows from that. If he doesn't really know who owns these woods, then it might not be the person who lives in the village, in which case there might indeed be someone nearby who can see him watching the woods fill up with snow for whatever reason. Now, notice how this same problem of uncertainty expressed as certainty continues throughout the poem. My little horse must think it queer, he says next. So we've gone from, I think I know, to this must be what my horse is thinking. How does he know that? It's not a totally unreasonable supposition, but getting inside the mind of an animal is at least a few steps of speculation beyond, I think I know whose property this is. In the third stanza, we leave behind think and must think to simply see an action taken completely at face value without any sense of interpretation by the speaker. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. I'm not assuming anything, he says. This is what my horse's action means. The final stanza, the fourth, gives us the verb are, the verb of being. We have now left behind speculation, fanciful thinking, the presumptuousness of humans, and landed on what is. But does that make sense given what we've seen of the speaker's thought process so far? We have to instead see that everything the speaker observes is tied up in speculation, ultimately in the imagination. I'll leave some of this work to you, but the speaker says he hears the sound of easy wind and downy or exceptionally soft snow. Is that a sound? He says he's watching that snow fill the woods on the darkest evening of the year, whatever that might mean. How do you watch something in the total absence of light? The speaker finds beauty in the woods, which are lovely because they are, in this pair of modifiers, dark and deep. Does their beauty consist in being unseeable, unhearable, unknowable? This is a poem about the power of the imagination, how we fill in the blanks of reality with our own sense of meaning. After all, the speaker tells you twice that he has promises to keep, repeating a vague line instead of providing an explanation. He leaves you with your own dark vastness to fill in. Thanks for listening.